The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for thousands of years, its authority unquestioned, its power unmatched. Across the known galaxy, countless civilizations had submitted to its will, either through diplomacy or overwhelming force. Those who resisted had been wiped from existence, their planets reduced to lifeless husks. And now, the Council had turned its gaze toward Earth. Humanity was a young species, ambitious and unpredictable. In just a few centuries, they had expanded beyond their homeworld, colonizing distant planets and developing technologies that rivaled those of ancient empires. The Council had tolerated them for a time, but now the humans were becoming a threat. Their fleets were growing, their influence spreading. The balance of power was shifting, and the Council would not allow it. From the core of the galaxy, an ultimatum was sent, one that had crushed countless civilizations before. The message was simple: humanity must disband its military, dismantle its warships, and swear loyalty to the Council, or face complete annihilation. There was no room for negotiation, no opportunity for compromise. The demand was delivered by the Council's most feared enforcer, High Chancellor Vorlek, a being whose very name sent shivers through the galaxy. He stood before the United Earth Assembly, his reptilian eyes filled with cold certainty. Behind him, a holographic display flickered, showing the vast Council armada positioned just outside Sol's system. Hundreds of warships, each one powerful enough to reduce a planet to dust, waited for a single command. The Chancellor's voice echoed through the chamber, emotionless and absolute. Submit or be erased from history. The room fell silent. Earth's leaders exchanged glances, their faces pale but unreadable. Every major power, Mars, Europa, the Belt colonies, had gathered for this moment. The weight of the decision hung over them like a storm. The Council expected immediate surrender. It was the only logical choice. No species had ever stood against them and survived. Their fleets spanned the stars, their technology millennia ahead of anything humanity possessed. Resistance was suicide. And yet, the humans did not bow. Instead, President Alexander Graves leaned forward, his expression calm but unyielding. He studied the Chancellor for a long moment before speaking, his voice steady. "We have heard your demand," he said, "and our answer is no." The room tensed. Even the most hardened military leaders shifted in their seats. The Council representatives, seated on the opposite side of the hall, exchanged glances of disbelief. Chancellor Vorlek's eyes narrowed, his ridged brow furrowing. "You do not understand the consequences of your defiance," he said. "You will be exterminated." Graves did not flinch. "Perhaps," he said, "but we will not kneel." The Chancellor's face darkened. For the first time in centuries, a species had dared to defy the Council's will. The silence was shattered as the holographic display shifted, showing a real-time view of the Council's warships. They were moving, positioning themselves for an attack. Earth's planetary defenses were already active, but everyone in the room knew the truth: the Council's firepower was overwhelming. No shield, no fleet, no amount of preparation could stop the devastation that was coming. The Chancellor gave one final warning, his voice filled with the certainty of a conqueror. "This is your last chance. Accept our rule, or be destroyed." The President did not hesitate. He tapped a command into the table before him. Instantly, the massive screen behind him changed. A new image appeared, a fleet, hidden deep within the void, beyond the reach of Council spies. The Terran fleet. Sleek, angular warships, unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Their hulls were reinforced with experimental alloys, their weapons powered by technology the Council had never encountered. And there were thousands of them. They had not been built for conquest, nor for expansion. They had been built for this very moment. A slow, chilling realization spread across the room. The Council had underestimated humanity. For decades, the humans had been preparing, waiting for the inevitable. The Council had given them no choice but to fight, and now they were ready. The Chancellor's eyes widened in something almost resembling fear. "Impossible," he whispered. Graves stood, his gaze unshaken. "You believed we were weak. You believed we would surrender. He stepped forward, his voice like iron. But you made one mistake. He turned toward the screen, where the Terran fleet loomed like a storm on the horizon. You gave us time. For the first time in the Council's long history, the ultimatum had backfired. Humanity would not be conquered. Humanity would not be erased. The war for the galaxy had begun. The Galactic Council had always believed in its absolute superiority. For thousands of years, no species had dared to defy its rule. No civilization had risen high enough to challenge its might. The mere thought of resistance was seen as foolish, a guaranteed path to extinction. But now, for the first time in history, a species had refused to submit. Humanity had rejected the Council's ultimatum, and the response was swift. The massive Council armada began its advance toward Earth, preparing to enforce obedience with fire and destruction. Across the galaxy, alien leaders watched with certainty. This would be the end of the human race. No species had ever survived open war with the Council. It was not a battle, it was an execution. The skies over Earth darkened as the enemy fleet emerged from hyperspace, their warships forming an impenetrable blockade around the solar system. Each vessel carried enough firepower to annihilate entire continents, their weapons primed and ready to strike. The Council's generals prepared to send their final warning, expecting the humans to surrender once they saw the full scale of the forces arrayed against them. But as the Council's warships tightened their formation, something unexpected happened. The humans were not panicking. They were not sending desperate messages for peace. They were waiting. And then, without warning, the void itself seemed to shift. Deep beyond the outer edges of the solar system, in the vast darkness where no Council scout had ever ventured, space tore open. A massive distortion rippled through the void, and from it emerged something never before seen: the Terran fleet. At first, the Council ships detected only anomalies, strange readings that made no sense. Then the sensors overloaded as massive warships, dark as the abyss itself, materialized from their hidden strongholds. They did not resemble the clunky, outdated vessels the Council had expected from a young species. These ships were predators, sleek, angular, and designed for one purpose: destruction. Their hulls were constructed from experimental alloys that bent light, making them almost invisible against the darkness of space. Their weapons pulsed with raw energy, radiating a power that sent waves of panic through the Council's ranks. And there were thousands of them. The bridge of the Council's flagship, Vrex Dominion, was silent as the alien commanders watched the impossible unfold. No species had ever built a fleet of this magnitude in secrecy. No civilization had ever outmaneuvered the Council like this. And yet, here they were, human warships, standing ready for battle, their weapons locked onto the invaders. Panic spread through the Council's communications. The generals demanded explanations. How had the humans hidden such a fleet? How had they developed technology so advanced without the Council's knowledge? It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, the proof was there, staring them down. The Council had walked into a trap of its own making. On Earth, President Alexander Graves stood before a massive holographic display, watching the fleet move into position. This was the moment humanity had prepared for. For decades, they had known that war with the Council was inevitable. The warnings had been clear: every species that grew too powerful was either crushed or enslaved. The only way to survive was to be ready before the enemy even realized the threat. In the shadows of deep space, humanity had built its answer. The Terran fleet was not just a defensive force, it was a statement. A message to the galaxy that humanity would not be conquered. They had taken the Council's tactics, their technology, and pushed it beyond anything the aliens had imagined. Faster than light disruptors, energy weapons that could tear through planetary shields, AI-controlled drones that moved with terrifying precision, every innovation was designed to break the Council's hold on the galaxy. The moment stretched as the two fleets faced each other in the void. On the Vrex Dominion, High Chancellor Vorlek struggled to comprehend the situation. His voice, usually filled with authority, wavered as he addressed his officers. This is not possible. They should not have this kind of power. But power was no longer a question. The humans had it, and now they were about to use it. A single transmission echoed through the vastness of space, transmitted from the Terran flagship Ironclad. President Graves' voice was calm, unwavering. "You came here expecting surrender," he said. "Instead, you have found your end." Without another word, the first strike was unleashed. A blinding beam of energy lanced through space, cutting across the darkness like a blade of pure destruction. It struck the Vrex Dominion directly, bypassing its shields as if they didn't exist. For a moment, silence filled the galaxy. Then the flagship exploded in a massive fireball, torn apart in a single instant. The Council's most powerful warship was gone, its remains drifting into the void. Panic erupted among the Council's fleet. Their commanders shouted conflicting orders, their formations breaking apart. No species had ever dared to strike first against the Council. No species had ever won the opening battle. But the humans had never played by the Council's rules. As the first wave of Terran warships surged forward, the realization spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The balance of power had shifted. The Council was no longer the supreme force in the stars. Humanity had stepped into the light, not as victims, not as rebels, but as something far more dangerous. They were a species that refused to be ruled, and as their fleet moved in for the kill, one undeniable truth became clear. The age of the Council was ending. The Terran era had begun. The Galactic Council had never known fear until now. The destruction of their flagship, Vrex Dominion, and the sudden unveiling of the Terran fleet had shattered their illusion of absolute control. Panic spread through the Council's war councils as they tried to comprehend the impossible. Humanity, a species they had dismissed as insignificant, had built warships that rivaled the might of the oldest empires. The Council had sent its fleet to crush them, expecting an easy victory, but now they were the ones on the defensive. Refusing to admit defeat, they issued a desperate order: regroup at Alpha Centauri and launch a full-scale counterattack. This battle would decide everything. Either the Council would reclaim its dominance, or humanity would take its first step toward ruling the stars. The warships of the Council arrived at Alpha Centauri in formation, stretching across the system like an iron wall. The sheer number of vessels was staggering. Thousands of battle cruisers, dreadnoughts, and fighter swarms, each carrying weapons capable of leveling entire planets, hovered in preparation. At their center was the Exaroth Supreme, a mobile command station fortified with the strongest shields ever developed. The Council's commanders stood on its bridge, staring at the cold void of space, waiting for the Terran fleet to arrive. This time, there would be no surprises. The Council had brought its entire war machine, determined to crush humanity before the rebellion could spread. But the humans had already planned for this. They did not come in a straight charge, nor did they follow the predictable battle strategies of the Council. Instead, they warped in at impossible angles, exiting hyperspace directly behind enemy lines. The sudden emergence of massive Terran warships threw the Council's fleet into chaos. Their formations, carefully arranged for a frontal assault, were now useless. Officers shouted orders, trying to reorient their weapons, but the humans did not wait. The first attack came like a storm. Terran battleships unleashed their fury with terrifying precision. Energy lances cut through the void, slicing into enemy hulls before shields could fully activate. Railguns fired rounds at speeds so great that they pierced straight through dreadnoughts, leaving nothing but shattered wreckage drifting through space. AI-controlled drone swarms moved with deadly efficiency, dodging counterfire as they ripped through entire squadrons of Council fighters. The humans were not just fighting, they were hunting. On board the Exaroth Supreme, Admiral Kal Roth, a veteran of countless wars, could hardly believe his eyes. The Council had prepared for a brutal, drawn-out conflict, but this was slaughter. Every time their ships tried to reposition, the humans struck first. Every time they attempted to retreat, their escape routes were cut off. It was as if the Terrans knew their every move before they even made it. And then he understood. It wasn't just their ships or their weapons that made the humans dangerous, it was their strategy. They had spent years studying the Council's military tactics, learning every strength, every weakness. This was not a desperate fight for survival. This was an execution. Then, the humans unleashed their final weapon. From the depths of space, the TFS Titan emerged, a ship larger than anything the Council had ever faced. Its hull was covered in energy-absorbing plating, rendering most Council weapons useless. And at its core was something far more terrifying: the Singularity Cannon. This was humanity's greatest achievement, a weapon designed not just to destroy ships, but to collapse space itself. As the charge built within the cannon, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. Every sensor, every scanner, froze as the weapon locked onto its first target. Admiral Cale Roth's heart pounded. All ships, fire everything. Destroy that monster before it was too late. The Singularity Cannon fired, unleashing a controlled gravitational collapse in the heart of the Council's fleet. The Xerath Supreme never stood a chance. Its shields flickered and died as the distortion wave crushed it in an instant. The massive command station imploded, collapsing in on itself before vanishing into the darkness. The shockwave spread outward, pulling nearby warships into the Singularity's grasp. Dozens of ships disappeared in seconds, torn apart by a force they couldn't comprehend. The remaining Council forces panicked. Their leaders were dead, their strongest weapons destroyed. Terror took hold as their fleet fractured, some ships trying to flee, others firing blindly in desperation. The humans did not hesitate. Their warships moved in like predators, closing in on wounded prey, tearing through what remained of the once mighty Council armada. What had begun as a battle had become a massacre. By the time the last Council warship self-destructed to avoid capture, the war was already over. The mighty rulers of the galaxy had been broken in a single battle. The message was clear: the old order had fallen, and humanity was rising in its place. As the wreckage of the Council's fleet drifted through space, a final transmission was sent to every civilization in the galaxy. It contained no threats, no declarations of war. Just a single message from President Graves himself. The Terran Federation does not seek conquest, but we will never be ruled. If you raise your weapons against us, you will share the fate of the Council. The galaxy had changed forever, and humanity had just begun its ascent. The ruins of the Galactic Council's once mighty fleet drifted in silence through the void. Fires still burned on shattered warships, their metal hulls glowing as they disintegrated into the cold darkness of space. The Battle of Alpha Centauri had been more than just a defeat. It had been an extinction event for the Council's rule. The galaxy, once held together by the iron grip of their authority, now trembled in uncertainty. For millennia, their rule had been absolute, their judgment unquestioned. But all of that had ended when the Terran fleet struck. From the bridge of the TFS Ironclad, President Alexander Graves stood with his hands behind his back, gazing at the remains of what was once the greatest fleet in the known universe. The war was over, but its consequences had only just begun. Humanity had not only survived against the Council's wrath, it had shattered their power structure completely. Now, every species that had once obeyed the Council's decrees faced a new reality. The rulers they had feared were gone, their fleets annihilated, their command centers burning. And in the silence that followed, one question loomed over every star system. Across the galaxy, chaos erupted. The Council's capital world, Zenthari Prime, was the first to fall. News of the Council's defeat spread faster than light, and within hours, the streets of its towering cities were flooded with riots. The alien species who had lived under the Council's rule, some for generations, rose up against their overlords. Former slaves took up stolen weapons, once loyal officers turned on their superiors, and planetary governors found themselves dragged from their palaces by the very people they had once controlled. The great banners of the Council, which had once flown proudly over every major world, were now being torn down, burned in the streets as symbols of a dying empire. But the collapse of the Council was not just political, it was military, economic, and social. Supply chains that had once connected thousands of worlds crumbled overnight. Trade routes, once protected by the Council's fleets, became lawless battlegrounds where desperate factions fought for control. Dozens of former client species, long suppressed under the Council's rule, now found themselves facing a dangerous reality. They were free, but freedom came with a cost. Without the Council to maintain order, wars erupted between old enemies. Empires that had been forced into submission for centuries now saw their chance to reclaim lost honor, and entire planets became battlefields overnight. From the hidden depths of space, pirate clans, warlords, and rogue factions surged forward like vultures, picking at the remains of the fallen empire. They hijacked Council transport ships, raided once secure colonies, and carved out new kingdoms for themselves in the lawless regions of space. The very foundation of the galaxy trembled as the vacuum left by the Council's fall threatened to consume everything. Yet, in the midst of the growing storm, one force remained untouched. Humanity, the species that had triggered the collapse, now stood as the only organized power left in the void. Unlike the others, the Terran Federation had not fallen into chaos. Their fleets remained intact, their homeworld secure, and their people united. While the rest of the galaxy burned, humanity stood stronger than ever. On a secret broadcast sent to every major faction, President Graves made one final declaration to the shattered remains of the galactic order. His voice was calm, but behind it was a warning that no species could ignore. The Galactic Council is no more. The old ways have failed. If you seek to rebuild the galaxy, do so wisely. But know this, if you attempt to replace the Council with another empire of tyranny, if you seek to enslave or oppress, the Terran fleet will come for you. We are not conquerors, but we will never allow another regime of oppression to rise. The future of the stars belongs to those who choose to stand as equals, not as rulers and slaves. The message was clear. Humanity had no interest in ruling the galaxy, but they would never allow another power to dominate it again. For some, this was a warning. For others, it was an invitation. As the fires of the old empire burned out, new alliances began to take shape. Former Council worlds reached out to the Terran Federation, seeking protection, seeking guidance. Some species, once terrified of humanity's rise, now saw them as the only force capable of keeping the galaxy from total collapse. But others saw an opportunity. In the shadows of distant worlds, remnants of the Council's old elite whispered of revenge. Generals who had escaped them. And as humanity prepared for what came next, one thing was certain: the age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of humanity had begun. The galaxy had never known such silence before. Once, the great fleets of the Galactic Council patrolled the stars, their presence a symbol of unchallenged authority. But now, their warships were nothing more than floating wreckage, their proud banners reduced to ashes. The Battle of Alpha Centauri had not just been a defeat, it had been the end of an era. And in the vacuum left behind, a new power had risen. Humanity. From the bridge of the TFS Dauntless, President Alexander Graves looked out at the vastness of space, his expression unreadable. The war was over, but victory brought with it a new responsibility. The Terran Federation had done the impossible. It had not only survived against the Council's wrath, but had broken their ancient dominion. Now, the fate of countless species hung in the balance. Across the stars, worlds that had once been ruled by fear now faced an uncertain future. With the Council gone, the galaxy stood on the edge of either a new golden age or total collapse. On every former Council-controlled planet, some worlds celebrated their newfound freedom, throwing down the statues of their old masters, while others descended into anarchy. Old rivalries, once kept in check by the Council's iron grip, now reignited in bloody conflicts. Factions rose and fell overnight, scrambling for control over what remained. The once mighty trade networks that connected thousands of systems had collapsed, leaving entire planets desperate for resources. Without order, survival itself became uncertain. But while the rest of the galaxy struggled in the aftermath, the Terran Federation stood unshaken. Unlike the crumbling empires around them, humanity had emerged from the war stronger than before. Their fleets remained intact, their colonies united, their people driven. They had fought for their right to exist, and now they had a choice to make. Would they let the galaxy burn, or would they take control of its future? The answer came in the form of a single broadcast, sent out to every system, every species, every surviving government. The message was simple, but its impact was immeasurable. The old order has fallen. The Terran Federation does not seek to rule, but we will not allow tyranny to rise again. The future of the galaxy must be built on cooperation, not oppression. We extend our hand to those who seek peace, but make no mistake, any who attempt to restore the chains of the past will find themselves facing the full might of the Terran fleet. It was not a declaration of conquest. It was a statement of authority. Humanity would not become the next overlords, but neither would they allow another empire to take the Council's place. The message sent a shockwave across the stars. Some welcomed it, eager to rebuild under Terran guidance. Others feared it, recognizing that humanity had gone from an underdog to the most dominant force in the galaxy. And in the shadows, those who had once ruled in arrogance whispered of revenge. From the shattered remnants of the Council's leadership, hidden warlords and exiled officials gathered in secrecy. They still believed the galaxy belonged to them. They spoke of vengeance, of reclaiming their lost power, of bringing humanity to its knees. Their spies moved between systems, searching for allies willing to resist the new Terran influence. And in the forgotten corners of space, abandoned Council warships powered up once more, their crews preparing for one final attempt to reclaim their former glory. But they had underestimated humanity. Unlike the old empires, which had relied on fear to maintain control, the Terran Federation adapted. They did not demand loyalty, they earned it. Instead of ruling with an iron fist, they extended their hand to those who had suffered under the Council's rule. They offered protection to planets struggling in the chaos, assisted in rebuilding shattered economies, and forged alliances instead of forcing obedience. One by one, systems that had once feared them now turned to them for guidance. And for the first time in history, the galaxy saw something it had never seen before, a government not built on conquest, but on unity. Yet, the dangers were far from over. The remnants of the old order were still out there, watching, waiting. The Council's surviving admirals would not sit idly by and accept defeat. They had seen the rise of the Terran Federation, and they refused to accept a galaxy where humanity stood at the center. In the darkness, they gathered their forces, preparing for what they saw as their final war, a last, desperate attempt to reclaim the power they had lost. And humanity? They were ready. The dawn of the Terran era had begun, but its survival would not come without struggle.